Hello everyone, this is Jake from CINECALIBER. In today's video I'm actually going to be covering the first 5 episodes of the new animated show X-Men 97. For those of you that don't know, X-Men 97 is a continuation of the original 90s animated show. Basically, this is a show that's one of my most anticipated for the 2024 year. So I'm really excited to finally cross this one off my list and kind of dive into what's been going on. So first I'm going to do a recap of the events of the original X-Men animated show. Before I do that, I kind of want to talk about Bayo de Mayo. He is the showrunner for the X-Men 97 show, and he made actually seasons 1 and 2. 2 isn't out yet, but he basically made the whole thing. It's ready to go, but unfortunately it was a dismissal. He so far, for the first 5 episodes, he's done a tremendous job. And so from there, I'm going to be going over some of the events from the old show that are going to be relevant for these episodes. So for one, now again, spoilers. For anyone who hasn't seen the original X-Men show, there will be some spoilers. I recommend you guys watching that show before watching this new show to get the most out of the new show. But the first thing I want to talk about, recap-wise, was Professor Xavier's death. He dies at the end of that show. And then it was like a major cliffhanger, and the team just didn't know what was going to happen. And then also, another big thing I wanted to say is that there's a villain that kind of pops in and out throughout that show called Mr. Negative. And he had always these grand plans for Jean and Cyclops and kind of harnessing their offspring to make the ultimate mutant. He has a very big obsession with making perfect genetics. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was the Human Sentinel program. That is actually a program made by for humans to kind of eradicate the mutants, and that's basically just getting it's like a bunch of robots just basically coming to eliminate all the mutants. And that was a huge storyline in season 1. Robert Trask was like a huge part of that whole thing, and that also kind of goes into this first episode as well. But those are the big main things that from the old show kind of flow into these. So we're actually going to go into episode 1. So here's the review for episode 1. We're going to start with the plot summary. Plot summary is Cyclops races to find the source of a new anti-mutant technology. So let me tell you, within the first 10 minutes of this episode, I was like, holy crap, they've really outdid themselves. Like, they went in such a great way to modernize this show, and it just flows so much better. It's not as cheesy as the original show was. There's a way more action sequences that flow better, and just the overall characterizations. I really felt the characters were lacking in that original show, and there was just such a focus on Wolverine all the time. And Wolverine, as great of a character he is, he's overplayed. This show already from the get-go starts to explore some of the other characters, which is very much needed. The big focus I'd say in this episode was Cyclops. He was always supposed to be this kind of leader. Professor Xavier was always training him to be the leader to take over the X-Men. But I never got that vibe from him in the original show. But in this first episode, he makes all these decisions. He's got all these internal struggles. They really showcase him as a character in here and how he's really trying to be that leader. And it's something I've never seen in an X-Men movie or show, because he's always downplayed. So the focus on him was very much needed. He had some really great moments in the action sequences as well, just seeing how powerful he is as a mutant. And then also, this episode, for the most part, as you guys can gather from the plot summary, it kind of goes back to that Sentinel program that I was telling you about from the original show's first season. That kind of pops back up. They are basically trying to solve the mystery of why it's all coming back, and there's some really good fight scenes when they finally get to the root of it all, and it's a really great episode, like a very good beginning for this show. And then also at the very end, there is the team has to deal with the return of Magneto, who apparently wants to take over for Professor Xavier. So that was a big whoa, you know. And the episode 2 also is like the theme of it is just the team just trying to adjust to the loss of Charles Xavier, and I thought that was, you know, showcased very well in this episode. But now we are going to actually go into episode 2. So here's the plot summary for episode 2. When Magneto is forced by the UN to stand trial, a group of anti-mutant rioters test his resolve. So this episode focuses, as you can gather, on Magneto. He kind of comes back. He wants to take over for Professor X and help the X-Men. This really shows like his progress as a character as well, because Magneto's always been the bad guy, but now we get to see him in a new light. Like now he's basically a good guy, or trying to be a good guy, and they really showcase how his efforts in trying to be that character, like the hero, the leader. And then there's like a moment where he has to be in front of the UN, and he's basically trying to convince the humans that, you know, we're trying to just get equal rights for all the mutants. So, and there's a lot of concerns because he's a terrorist, of course. So, you know, hopefully, you know, it all works out for him in the end. But then there was also some really good action sequences as well, and one of these sequences, Storm actually ends up losing her powers, which I thought is going to make for a very interesting narrative. So I'm excited to see where they go with her, because she was another character that's been kind of downplayed. And then really the other big thing I saw in this episode was there's a big reveal at the end of that episode as well, which kind of revolves around Jean, and I'll talk about that more in episode 3. So here we go. Episode 3. The plot summary: when a visitor arrives at the mansion with a dangerous secret that threatens Cyclops and Jean's relationship, the team is propelled into a tragic confrontation with an immortal mad scientist. So, as you can gather, this episode is mostly focused on Jean Grey. They get this visitor, and like I said, slight spoilers, and this visitor is basically a clone of Jean Grey made by Mr. Negative, and that just blew my mind when I found that out. I was like, oh my god, how long has she been this clone? Because they've gone through so much. But then you can also gather that puts a huge wrench in the relationship between Jean and Scott, because he's been with a woman that's really not Jean for this whole time. And, you know, they just had a baby together, and his name's Nathan, and, you know, they kind of go into that. And it just, you know, it makes for an interesting dynamic here, what they're gonna do, you know, and then also this clone, they call her, I think they give her a name Madeline. She kind of gets taken over by Mr. Negative, and then there's like this huge, big horror aspect of the episode. It's like a house of horrors. Everyone's like darkest thoughts come to life. I thought that was a really neat sequence, really. Like the show, like 3 episodes in, I'm like, holy crap, this show is just really, every episode seems to get better and better, and these characterizations and explorations are doing such a phenomenal job. And then, of course, we get the return of Mr. Negative, who's always been kind of a recurring antagonist of this show. And, you know, I thought his return was pretty well done, but, you know, he's a weasel. He's going to always kind of come back. So, you know, this episode kind of left off with, you know, I'm done for now, but, you know, basically ta-ta for now. So, where it all concludes, really, I mean, the clone has to go on her own way. Something happens with Nathan. You know, I don't want to spoil too much, but, you know, they're kind of in a dark place right now. All these things are happening, and of course, Professor Xavier's gone, and they're still reeling from his death. So, and that was it for episode 3. And then another thing, and then episode 4 I'm going to be covering here is, here's the plot summary for that. On her birthday, a nostalgic Jubilee is forced to relive the X-Men's greatest adventures when an entertainment system transports her into a 16-bit video game. So really, even though that plot summary only just goes over Jubilee, this is actually a 2-act episode, meaning it focuses on 2 specific people. One focuses on Jubilee, and the other part of the episode focuses on Storm. So let me tell you, I mean, Jubilee, this episode evolves her. Like, it's almost like watching Krillin, if you guys watch Dragon Ball, or one of those minor characters kind of evolve their powers. That's basically what happens here with Jubilee. And it's a very much needed episode to kind of showcase her powers, because let me tell you, in the original show, she was such an annoyance. They didn't do much with her. She wasn't allowed to do anything. It was like, what are you doing with this character? Like, give her a shot. And it never happened. It's like, I don't know why the writers never did. It's very odd, but this was a very much needed episode to really showcase her and make her build up as a character. Honestly, it felt more of like a filler compared to what's been going on, but again, that focus on her was very much needed. And then at the same time, the same thing goes for Storm. So when they conclude Jubilee's arc, they go to Storm, who, as I told you in episode 2, she lost her powers. So it puts her in a very, bad predicament, or an interesting predicament, because now she has to deal with being human. That's got to be rough. And it's just her, her journey, trying to, figure herself out, seeing, is she going to try to get her powers back? Is she just going to settle and be a human? That's basically where we're at. It's pretty dark, though. This is probably the darker part of the episode, because it kind of goes into her like darker feelings and thoughts. And she meets a character trying to help her. So it's a lot, and of course it ends up on a cliffhanger, which you actually don't get answers for right away. So that kind of sucks. But Storm was another one. She was always just like, oh, I got claustrophobia and this and that, and again, just kind of a wimp. And the writing is just doing a tremendous job with these characters so far, and I'm loving it. I'm loving every minute of it. And then finally, we're going to go over episode 5. Here's the plot summary for that. As Genosha prepares to join the UN, select members of the team head to the island nation to be honorees. Back at the mansion, a behind-the-scenes press event risks airing the X-Men's dirty laundry. So guys, as of this episode, this was arguably the best episode of the entire show so far. It is astounding how good this episode was. It was like we were building up and all to this pivotal episode, and it's like the turning point for everything, and it's just amazing. If you wanted to compare it, I always compare this big episodes like this. This was like the red wedding of this show, and even though we're only 5 episodes in, it's like, oh my god. So basically the mutants are starting to become like one nation finally under Genosha, and it's under Magneto's leadership. There's a lot of good things happening. They're finally making progress and making equal rights for the mutants. And then in the middle of all of that, there's like a Rogue, Magneto, Gambit love triangle, which they were always kind of hinting at some kind of a romance between Rogue and Magneto, but now this basically confirms it. So it makes it interesting, because the whole thing, Magneto needs someone by his side, because they don't trust him fully to be the leader. But if an X-Men is by his side, it's a different story. So it kind of makes some conflict between Rogue and Gambit, who have been kind of on and off in their own relationship throughout the original show. So yeah, it was an interesting dynamic. But then it all just ends with this crazy sequence in Genosha where people they just get killed left and right. Like, basically how in Game of Thrones, Robb Stark and all these big characters die. This is the same thing that happens in this show. Just this big Sentinel army just comes and just wipes out all these characters, one left and right. I don't really want to go into too much of that to spoil it for you guys, but just be aware this is a really dark episode, really graphic episode too, and the X-Men are never going to be the same after this. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go after this episode. But yeah, I'm going to actually, that's all I had to talk about for the first 5 episodes. We're going to talk about the conclusion now. So as of now, this is arguably one of the best animation shows so far for this year. And it gives me high hopes for the second half of the season. I have not seen Invincible yet, but I imagine Invincible would probably rival this show. But so far, since I have not really fully indulged in Invincible, I would have to say that X-Men 97 definitely is the best so far. And without further ado, please comment and like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.